Connor Williams had always been the type of person to work for everything he got. Growing up in a small town, raised by his mother after his father disappeared when he was just a baby, his life had been far from easy. But he had grit, and it got him into one of the top universities in the country on a full scholarship. This wasn't enough for Connor, though. He wanted more. That's why, when the opportunity for an internship at Armstrong Enterprises came up, he jumped at it. Armstrong Enterprises was a technological giant, the kind of place people fought tooth and nail to even get noticed. But somehow, against all odds, Connor made it through. The day he received the email confirming his acceptance into the internship program was a blur. He could barely believe it. He would be working directly under Leo Armstrong, the legendary tech tycoon known for building one of the world's largest tech empires from scratch. That morning, as Connor stood outside the towering glass building of Armstrong Enterprises, his nerves finally started to hit. The place was intimidating. It wasn't just the size of the building or the constant stream of high-powered executives moving in and out. It was the weight of the name behind it all, Leo Armstrong. The man was a mystery to most of the world, known for his eccentricity as much as for his genius. Rumors swirled around him. Some said he was impossible to work for. Others claimed he hadn't left the building in years. Connor didn't know what to believe, but he couldn't shake a strange feeling growing in his gut. As he stepped inside, the cold, modern interior was a stark contrast to the warmth of the small town he'd left behind. Everything felt sleek, expensive, and somehow detached from reality. The receptionist's smile was polite but distant, and after a brief exchange, she directed him toward the elevators. "Top floor," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "Mr. Armstrong is expecting you." The elevator ride felt eternal. As the numbers climbed, Connor's mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. He adjusted his tie for the 100th time, his hands sweating. This was the chance of a lifetime. But what if he messed up? What if? The doors slid open, revealing the top floor. It was quiet, almost eerily so. Connor stepped out into a vast office space lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling far below him. The space was minimalistic but meticulously designed. Every piece of furniture perfectly placed, every surface gleaming. Then, a voice broke the silence. "You must be Connor." Connor turned sharply. Standing in the doorway to a smaller office was Leo Armstrong himself. He looked ordinary. No, that wasn't quite right. There was something about him, something off. His suit was tailored perfectly, but it didn't quite fit with his tired eyes and the unkempt beard that didn't match his billionaire status. His expression was unreadable as he leaned against the doorframe, watching Connor with an intensity that made him feel like a bug under a microscope. "Yes, sir," Connor stammered, stepping forward and extending his hand. "I'm Connor Williams." Leo's handshake was firm but brief. He studied Connor for a long moment, his eyes lingering a little too long, as if he were trying to recall something from a distant memory. "Come in," Leo said, his voice low and measured. "We've got work to do." Connor followed him into the office, his nerves now fully on edge. The man's presence was overwhelming. There was no small talk, no easing into things. Leo was all business, and Connor could feel the pressure mounting. Yet, there was something familiar in the way Leo spoke, something Connor couldn't quite put his finger on. It gnawed at him, a strange sensation of déjà vu. As the morning wore on, Connor tried to focus, taking in every detail of the work Leo assigned him. But his mind kept drifting back to that odd feeling. Why did Leo Armstrong, a man he had never met before, seem so familiar? And why did he feel like he wasn't here just by chance? Connor sat stiffly in the leather chair, trying to calm the nerves gnawing at him as Leo Armstrong stood by the window, his back turned. The office was unervingly quiet, and the view outside, an endless stretch of towering buildings glittering under the afternoon sun, only heightened the tension in the room. Leo remained silent for what felt like an eternity. His presence was heavy, commanding, and Connor couldn't help but feel out of place, like he was intruding on something far more significant than he could understand. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice low and controlled. "So, Connor," he began without turning around, "what is it you're hoping to get out of this internship?" The question caught Connor off guard. He had expected to be thrown straight into tasks, or maybe even criticized for something he hadn't done yet. Instead, Leo's tone was calm, almost too calm, and it made Connor's heart race faster. He straightened up, swallowing hard before answering. "Well, sir, I hope to learn as much as I can. Your company is at the forefront of technology, and working here is an incredible opportunity for someone like me. I want to contribute, but also grow. Learn from the best." Leo turned slowly, his eyes locking on Connor with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He didn't speak right away, just studied him with a curious gaze that bordered on unsettling. "Everyone says that when they walk in here," Leo said, his voice void of emotion. "They all want to learn, to contribute. It's almost predictable." Connor wasn't sure how to respond. His palms were sweating, and he wiped them subtly against his pants, hoping Leo hadn't noticed. The atmosphere felt charged, and Connor could sense that there was something beneath the surface of this conversation that he wasn't quite grasping. "But you," Leo continued, taking a slow step closer, "there's something different about you." "Different?" Connor echoed, unsure if he should be flattered or alarmed. His mind raced. What did Leo mean by different? And why did the word make his stomach twist in knots? Leo didn't immediately answer. He just kept staring at him, like he was trying to decode something in Connor's face, something Connor himself didn't even understand. The silence stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. "Let's see if I'm right," Leo finally said, breaking the moment with a casual shrug. "For now, I need you to start organizing these files. There's a presentation coming up, and I don't want any mistakes." Connor nodded quickly, eager to escape the intensity of Leo's gaze. He grabbed the stack of documents from the desk, trying not to look too eager to leave. The task seemed simple enough, but the weight of Leo's expectations hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Oh, and one more thing." Leo's voice stopped him just as he was about to walk out. "Perfection is not optional here. Anything less and you're done." The coldness in Leo's tone sent a shiver down Connor's spine. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Understood, sir." As he exited the office, the door closing softly behind him, Connor felt the pressure bearing down on him. He had known this internship would be a challenge, but there was something else going on. Something in the way Leo looked at him made Connor feel like he wasn't just being tested for the job. He was being scrutinized for something much deeper. But what unnerved him most wasn't the pressure or the high expectations. It was the strange sense of familiarity Leo gave him. He couldn't explain it, but somehow, being in Leo's presence felt like stepping into a story he had forgotten but was a part of all along. The following days at Armstrong Enterprises were a blur of meetings, tasks, and the constant pressure to keep up with the pace. Connor had barely settled into the rhythm when something unexpected happened that would shake him to his core. It started on a quiet afternoon. Connor had been tasked with organizing old documents and files from the company's archives, a tedious but important job Leo had insisted he handle personally. It was an odd request, but Connor didn't question it. Not openly, at least. His desk was now stacked with boxes of files that spanned decades of Armstrong Enterprises history. As he worked through them, his mind wandered back to Leo's cryptic behavior during their first meeting. That strange look, the comment about being different, the sensation of familiarity had only grown since then, an itch in the back of Connor's mind that he couldn't quite scratch. Hours passed, and the office had grown eerily silent as most of the staff had already left for the day. Connor was alone on the top floor, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. He was sorting through a particularly old set of files when he noticed the door to Leo's private office was slightly ajar. Curiosity tugged at him. Leo's office was off-limits. Everyone knew that. But there was something about the door being open, even just a crack, that felt like an invitation. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached cautiously. What harm could it do to take a quick peek? Maybe he could get a glimpse into the mind of the enigmatic billionaire who seemed to be watching his every move. Connor pushed the door open gently, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the room was surprisingly modest for a man of Leo Armstrong's status. It wasn't the grand, luxurious space Connor had imagined. The furnishings were simple: an elegant wooden desk, a few chairs, and shelves lined with books and awards. But it wasn't the decor that caught his attention. It was the small silver frame on Leo's desk, the same one he had noticed during their first meeting. The photo. It was turned away, just as before, but something about it called to Connor. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the door as if expecting Leo to materialize behind him at any second. But the office remained still, the only sound the faint hum of the building's ventilation. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out, carefully turning the frame around. The moment he saw the picture, his breath caught in his throat. It was a black and white photo of a woman, her smile bright and full of life. Her hair styled in a way that felt nostalgic, like a memory from another time. But that wasn't what shocked Connor. What sent a chill down his spine was the fact that he knew this woman. He knew her face. It was his mother. Connor's legs nearly gave out as he stared at the image, his mind racing. How was this possible? Why did Leo Armstrong, one of the richest and most powerful men in the world, have a picture of his mother in his office? A wave of disbelief washed over him, followed quickly by confusion, then fear. His mother had died when he was a child, leaving behind only fragmented memories and the painful mystery of his absent father. She had never spoken of knowing anyone like Leo Armstrong. No connection to a man of such wealth and power. And yet, here was undeniable proof that there had been something, some link between them. Connor's heart raced as he tried to make sense of it. Was this a mistake? Could it just be a coincidence? The resemblance was uncanny, but was it possible that this woman was simply someone who looked like his mother? No. He knew that face too well. The shape of her smile, the curve of her jaw, there was no mistaking it. As he stood there, the room seemed to close in around him, the silence pressing down on his chest. His thoughts spiraled, each question more overwhelming than the last. Why did Leo have this photo? How long had it been sitting here? And, most importantly, what did this mean about his mother? About him? He couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life, his mother's death, his scholarship, even this internship, was somehow connected to this moment. But how? Why? Connor's pulse thudded in his ears, and his mind raced with wild possibilities. Had Leo known his mother before she died? Was he involved in her life in some way? The questions only deepened the mystery, and with each one, the knot in Connor's stomach tightened. Suddenly, the door to the office creaked open wider, the sound shattering the suffocating silence. Connor whipped around, his heart in his throat. His first thought was that Leo had caught him, but when he turned, the doorway was empty. A wave of relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. He couldn't stand here any longer. He had to leave before anyone found him. Quickly, he put the frame back exactly where it had been, careful not to disturb anything else on the desk. But as he stepped back, something strange happened. That eerie sense of familiarity he had felt in Leo's presence surged forward, stronger than before. His head buzzed with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest, sharp and clear. Leo Armstrong wasn't just his boss. He was hiding something about Connor's past, and somehow, Connor's mother was at the center of it. As he hurried out of the office, closing the door behind him, Connor's mind was made up. He couldn't let this go. He had to find out the truth, no matter where it led. The image of his mother lingered in Connor's mind, twisting and churning like a storm he couldn't escape. Days passed, but the shock from that discovery refused to fade. Every time he saw Leo in the office, that picture was all he could think about. It was there, in the back of his mind, gnawing at him with unrelenting force. He couldn't concentrate on his work. He couldn't sleep. The more he thought about it, the more questions filled his head, and none of them had answers. Why had Leo never mentioned knowing his mother? What kind of relationship had they shared? Did Leo even know that Connor existed? The questions consumed him, and with each passing day, the need to confront Leo grew stronger until it became unbearable. On a rainy afternoon, when most of the staff had left the building, Connor decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to get answers. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as he approached Leo's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed what he would say, but now that the moment was here, his nerves were getting the better of him. The door to Leo's office was slightly ajar, just like the day he had discovered the photo. Taking a deep breath, Connor knocked softly before pushing it open. Leo was sitting at his desk, engrossed in something on his computer. He didn't look up as Connor entered, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the desk lamp and the pale light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. For a moment, Connor hesitated, unsure of how to start, but then he remembered that photo. His mother's face staring back at him from Leo's desk, and the hesitation vanished. "Mr. Armstrong," Connor began, his voice more tense than he intended. Leo finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Connor, what is it?" Connor swallowed, his heart racing. There was no turning back now. "I need to talk to you. It's about something I found in your office." Leo's eyes darkened slightly, his gaze sharpening. "What exactly did you find?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a warning. I found a photo," Connor said, his words tumbling out before he could stop them. "A photo of a woman. She looks just like my mother." For a brief moment, Leo's expression flickered, just for a second. But Connor saw it. It was a mix of recognition and something else, something deeper, more complicated. Leo quickly composed himself, but the damage was done. Connor knew he had struck a nerve. Leo leaned back in his chair, his face now a mask of cool indifference. "Your mother?" "Yes," Connor pressed, stepping closer to the desk. "I don't understand. Why do you have a picture of her? Did you know her?" Leo's gaze dropped to the desk for a moment, as if considering his next move carefully. The silence in the room stretched, thick with tension. Connor could feel his pulse thudding in his ears as he waited for an answer, his hands clenched at his sides. When Leo finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost measured. "Her name was Emily, wasn't it?" Connor felt a chill run through him. "Yes," he whispered. "Emily Williams. How did you know her?" Leo stood up slowly, walking over to the large window overlooking the city. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on the rain-soaked skyline. Connor stood there, his breath shallow, waiting. "We were close," Leo finally said, his back still turned. "A long time ago." The words hit Connor like a punch to the gut. He had suspected there was a connection, but hearing it confirmed out loud was something else entirely. "What do you mean by close? Were you involved with her?" Leo didn't answer immediately, his gaze still fixed on the rain outside. "Yes," he said softly. "I loved her, but things didn't work out." Connor felt a wave of confusion and anger rise inside him. None of this made sense. Why had his mother never mentioned any of this? Why had she kept such a huge part of her life hidden from him? "If you were involved with her, then why didn't she ever tell me? Why didn't I know anything about you?" Leo turned to face him, his expression grim. "Because I didn't know about you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Connor stared at Leo, his mind reeling. "What do you mean you didn't know?" "I didn't know she had a child," Leo said, his voice low but firm. "I didn't know about you, Connor." Connor's breath caught in his throat. All this time, he had been searching for answers, and now the truth was staring him in the face. Leo Armstrong, the man who had given him this internship, the man he had looked up to from afar, hadn't just known his mother. He was likely his father. But Leo hadn't known. He hadn't known about Connor's existence until this very moment. You didn't know?" Connor's voice was barely a whisper. "No," Leo said quietly, his eyes locked on Connor's. "She never told me. We parted ways before you came into the picture." Connor staggered back, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about his past, was crumbling around him. His hands trembled at his sides as he tried to make sense of it all. His mother had kept this from him. Asterisk and asterisk from Leo. Why? What had happened between them to cause her to hide such an important truth? "Why didn't she tell you?" Connor demanded, his voice rising. "Why did she keep it a secret?" Leo shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know. I never had the chance to ask. After we parted, I lost track of her. And now it's too late." The weight of the revelation settled heavily on Connor's shoulders. His mother was gone, and so were any answers she might have had. But that wasn't enough. He needed to know more, needed to understand why his life had been so entangled with Leo Armstrong's without him ever knowing it. "I don't understand," Connor muttered, more to himself than to Leo. "This doesn't make sense. There has to be more. There has to be a reason why she kept this from both of us." Leo stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Connor, I wish I had the answers, but I don't. I've spent years trying to understand the choices I made, and now I realize I've been missing a part of my life. You." Connor looked at him, torn between anger and disbelief. Leo, his possible father, stood there, so powerful, so distant, yet now somehow deeply connected to everything he thought he knew. But there was one thing he couldn't ignore. His mother had kept them apart for a reason, and Connor was determined to find out why. The revelation that Leo Armstrong might be his father left Connor in a state of turmoil. Over the next few days, the weight of the truth pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. Every interaction with Leo now felt charged, like they were both tiptoeing around the same unspoken truth, each man grappling with the enormity of the discovery. Connor couldn't just leave things as they were. There had to be more to the story. His mother, Emily, had kept this secret for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was buried deep in the past. If Leo didn't know about Connor, then it meant his mother had purposely hidden the pregnancy. And the question that haunted Connor now was, why? What had happened between them that made her feel she had to disappear from Leo's life entirely? One evening, after the office had emptied out, Leo approached Connor quietly. There was no grand confrontation this time, just the two of them, standing in the dimly lit hallway outside Leo's private office. Leo's expression was softer than usual, a far cry from the confident, commanding presence he usually exuded. "I've been thinking," Leo said quietly, his voice lacking its usual edge. "There's a lot we don't know. I can't explain why Emily kept me in the dark, but I think it's time we find out. Together." Connor wasn't sure how to feel about that. His relationship with Leo was complicated, to say the least. He wasn't sure if he could trust the man fully yet, but Leo's offer was sincere, and deep down, Connor knew he couldn't solve this mystery alone. If he wanted to understand his mother's decisions and her connection to Leo, he needed the help of the one person who had been there at the time. "Where do we even start?" Connor asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Leo exhaled heavily and motioned for Connor to follow him into his office. Once inside, Leo walked over to a sleek filing cabinet tucked away in the corner, one Connor hadn't noticed before. He opened it and pulled out a small, worn file folder, the edges yellowed with age. He placed it carefully on the desk between them. "This is everything I have from that time," Leo said, his voice carrying a note of regret. "It's not much, but it's a start." Connor hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. Inside, there were a few photographs, some handwritten letters, and several old business documents. The photos showed a much younger Leo, with the same intense gaze, but without the weight of years of power and responsibility on his shoulders. Standing beside him, laughing and carefree, was Emily. Connor's heart clenched as he stared at the photos. Seeing his mother like that, happy, alive, was like a punch to the chest. He had never known this version of her. "She was the love of my life," Leo said quietly, as if sensing Connor's thoughts. "I met her right before Armstrong Enterprises took off. We were young and everything was so simple back then." Connor didn't know what to say. He had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter in that moment. He flipped through the photographs until he came across a letter addressed to Leo. The handwriting was his mother's. He recognized it immediately. He hesitated before reading it, unsure if he was ready for whatever truth it held. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he unfolded the worn paper carefully. The letter was short, only a few lines, but it said more than Connor had expected. Asterisk Leo, I'm sorry. I can't stay. Things are more complicated than you know. Please understand, it's better this way, for both of us. Don't come looking for me. I'll always love you. Emily asterisk. Connor's hands shook as he read the words. His mother had left Leo. She had made a deliberate decision to walk away. But why? What had happened that was so complicated She felt the need to disappear without a trace. "Did you ever find out why she left?" Connor asked, his voice low and strained. Leo shook his head slowly, his eyes clouded with memories. "I tried. After she left, I searched for her for months. I couldn't understand why she would just disappear like that, without any warning. But every lead I followed came up empty. It was like she vanished into thin air." The frustration in Leo's voice was palpable, but there was also a deep sadness that Connor hadn't expected. For all of Leo's power and control, this was one area of his life where he had been left powerless. "I don't think she just vanished," Connor said, thinking aloud. There had to be something, or someone, forcing her to leave. Something big enough that she felt she had no choice. Leo's expression darkened. "I've thought the same thing for years, but I never found any evidence of someone threatening her, or anything like that." Connor stood, pacing the length of the office as the gears in his mind turned. His mother's departure wasn't just a decision based on fear or regret. It was calculated. There had to be a reason. And if Leo didn't know about Connor's existence, it meant his mother had kept him hidden on purpose. "What if it wasn't just about you?" Connor asked, stopping to look at Leo. "What if it was about me?" Leo's eyes locked with Connor's, and for a moment, the room felt suffocatingly small. The thought hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Could it be that his mother had left to protect Connor? From what? From whom? Leo nodded slowly, a grim understanding settling in. "It's possible. I was making enemies back then, powerful ones, rivals in the industry, people who didn't want to see me succeed. If Emily was caught up in that..." Connor's stomach twisted at the thought. His entire life, he had believed his mother's struggles were the result of poverty, of single parenthood. But now it seemed that there was something far more sinister behind it all. She had been running from something, hiding him away from a world of wealth and danger. Connor sifted through more of the letters, desperate for clues. One of the documents caught his eye, an old contract between Armstrong Enterprises and a now-defunct tech firm. The name on the contract was familiar, but Connor couldn't place where he'd seen it before. He held it up for Leo to see. "What's this?" Connor asked. Leo's face tightened when he saw the name. That's the company that tried to destroy me." The words sent a chill down Connor's spine. It was all starting to come together. Leo's rise to power, his enemies, and his mother's sudden disappearance. She had gotten caught in the crossfire of something far bigger than either of them had realized. Connor sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. The past was full of shadows, secrets buried so deep that unearthing them seemed impossible. But one thing was clear now. Emily had been running from something, and it had everything to do with Leo's world. And now that world was closing in on Connor too. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but as the fog of the past cleared, Connor could feel the storm brewing on the horizon. His mother hadn't simply vanished to protect herself. She had been hiding him. And now, as he and Leo began digging deeper, it was as though they had stirred a sleeping giant. The enemies Leo had mentioned, the ones who had tried to destroy him years ago, were starting to resurface. It began subtly, with small, unsettling events that Connor at first chalked up to coincidence. On a Wednesday evening, as he left Armstrong Enterprises late, his car wouldn't start. He sat in the dimly lit parking garage, turning the key in the ignition over and over, but nothing happened. When the mechanic came, he found the issue almost immediately. The wires had been cut. A deliberate act of sabotage. The next day, Connor's email inbox was flooded with strange messages, blank emails, some with attachments he didn't dare open. His personal computer, which he had always been careful about securing, suddenly slowed down, glitching and freezing in ways that seemed deliberate. His phone, too, began receiving calls from unknown numbers, calls that hung up as soon as he answered. At first, he dismissed these as random inconveniences, things that could happen to anyone. But when he started noticing the same black sedan parked near his apartment building multiple times over the course of a week, his gut told him something was very wrong. There was no mistaking it. He was being watched. One evening, after a particularly long day, Connor found himself sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his phone, debating whether to call Leo. He had promised himself he wouldn't involve Leo in the smaller details. He didn't want to look paranoid, and the last thing he needed was for Leo to start doubting his ability to handle the pressure. But this was different now. This wasn't just about him or his curiosity anymore. He was being targeted. Connor dialed Leo's number, his heart racing as the phone rang. Leo picked up on the second ring, his voice as calm as ever. "Connor? What's going on?" Leo's voice was sharp, the edge of concern evident. "I think something's happening," Connor said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not sure how to explain it, but I think someone's watching me. My car was sabotaged, and I've been getting these weird emails. And there's this car, this black sedan. It's been outside my building for days." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Connor could hear Leo's breathing, slow and deliberate, as if he were weighing his response carefully. "Connor," Leo finally said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. This isn't your imagination. They know you're getting close to something. And now, they're coming after you." Connor's blood ran cold. "Who's coming after me?" "There are people, powerful people, who wanted me gone years ago," Leo explained, his voice grim. "They tried to bury me, ruin my company, my life. I managed to fight them off, but they've always lingered in the shadows. If they've started targeting you, it means we've struck a nerve." Connor stood up, pacing his small kitchen, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "But why now? What do they want?" "They want to protect themselves," Leo said, his voice heavy. "If the truth about your mother comes out, if people find out what really happened back then, it could ruin them. And they know that by going after you, they can get to me." Connor felt a wave of anger rise within him. "So this is my fault? I've stirred things up by asking questions?" "No," Leo said firmly. "This was bound to happen. Your mother kept you hidden for a reason, and now that we're getting close to the truth, they're scared. But I won't let anything happen to you. We'll deal with this." Connor's mind raced as he tried to process everything. He thought about the photo of his mother on Leo's desk, the letters, the old contracts with the defunct tech firm. What had his mother gotten herself mixed up in? What kind of people had she been running from? "What do we do?" Connor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the situation was starting to settle on his shoulders, heavier than anything he had ever faced. Leo paused again, the silence thick with unspoken tension. "We need to be smart. If they know you're looking into this, they'll try to stop you, maybe worse. We can't take any chances." Connor felt a shiver run down his spine. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to stay close to me," Leo replied, his voice dead serious. "If they think they can intimidate you into backing off, they'll only escalate. But if they see you're with me, they'll think twice. We need to find out who's behind this and what they're hiding." Connor agreed reluctantly. As much as he hated the idea of being under Leo's constant protection, he knew it was the smart move. There was too much at stake now. Not just his own safety, but the truth about his mother, about Leo, and about the forces that had been lurking in the shadows all these years. The next few days were tense. Connor stayed on high alert, his eyes constantly scanning the street for the black sedan or any other sign that he was being watched. He started spending more time at the office, where Leo's security team kept a closer eye on things. The tension was thick, but Leo remained calm, always one step ahead. One afternoon, while Connor was going through more of the old files Leo had given him, he came across something unusual, a name he hadn't seen before. It was scrawled in the margins of one of the contracts, a name that looked hastily scribbled, almost like a warning. Victor Lane. Connor's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure why, but something about the name sent a chill through him. He jotted it down quickly, making a mental note to ask Leo about it later. That night, as Connor walked to his car after another long day at the office, he noticed the black sedan parked just across the street again, its engine idling quietly. His heart pounded as he approached his car, trying to keep his pace steady, his eyes darting to the shadows. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind the sedan, moving toward him swiftly. Connor's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the man. He had seen him before, in the background of old photos from Leo's past. This man had once been part of Leo's inner circle, and now he was here, standing just a few feet away from Connor, his face cold and expressionless. "We need to talk," the man said, his voice low and threatening. "You're getting into things you don't understand. Walk away now, or it'll be worse than you can imagine." Connor stood frozen, his mind racing. He didn't need Leo to tell him who this was. He knew. The enemies from Leo's past weren't just emerging, they were closing in. Connor's blood ran cold as he stared at the man in front of him. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and the low rumble of the black sedan idling behind the stranger. Every instinct screamed at Connor to run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. He had never seen the man up close before, but his presence felt familiar, dangerous. The stranger stood tall, his posture relaxed but radiating menace, his dark eyes locked onto Connor with unsettling intensity. "We need to talk," the man repeated, his voice calm, almost casual, but the threat behind it was unmistakable. "You're digging into things you have no business knowing about." Connor swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the suffocating realization that he was no longer just an intern caught in corporate intrigue. This was much bigger than him, bigger than Leo Armstrong. His mother's secrets, Leo's powerful enemies, and now this man, standing just a few feet away, making it clear that Connor had stumbled into something dark and dangerous. "What do you want from me?" Connor finally managed to say, his voice betraying the fear he was trying to hide. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, though there was no warmth in it. "I want you to understand the position you're in. You've been digging into your mother's past, into Leo's past. That's a mistake." Connor clenched his fists at his sides, anger rising to the surface. "You can't scare me off," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I deserve to know the truth about my mother, about what happened between her and Leo, why she had to run." The man took a step closer, his shadow falling over Connor, making him feel small, vulnerable. "The truth? The truth won't help you, kid. It'll only get you killed." Connor's breath hitched, and for a split second, panic flared in his chest. But then, just as quickly, it was replaced by a surge of defiance. He had come too far to back down now. Whoever this man was, whatever power he held, Connor knew one thing for certain. If his mother had sacrificed everything to protect him, then he had to keep going. He had to find out why. "I'm not walking away," Connor said, his voice stronger now, his resolve solidifying. "Whatever it is you're trying to hide, I'm going to uncover it." The man's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed, his expression hardening into something cold, predatory. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. "You think you're in control, but you have no idea what's coming." Connor took a step back, his heart pounding. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like the calm before a storm. The man's words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of violence. Before Connor could respond, the stranger reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "Here," the man said, thrusting it toward Connor. "Consider this your only warning. Stop digging, or there will be consequences." Connor hesitated, then snatched the paper from the man's hand, his pulse racing. He unfolded it quickly, his eyes scanning the words. It was an address in a part of town he wasn't familiar with. No explanation, no name, just the address. "What's this?" Connor asked, looking up in confusion. The man's expression remained cold. "Go there if you want to know the truth. But don't say I didn't warn you." Without another word, the man turned and walked back to the black sedan, sliding into the passenger seat as the car pulled away into the night, leaving Connor standing alone in the dimly lit street, the piece of paper clenched tightly in his hand. His mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. This address, wherever it led, was a key to unlocking the secrets that had been haunting him since he first found that photo in Leo's office. He stared at the paper, the address burning into his mind. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to forget this ever happened, but he couldn't. He was too far in now, too deep to turn back. The next morning, Connor was sitting in Leo's office, the tension between them palpable. Leo had been pacing back and forth, his expression dark, his frustration evident. Connor had told him everything about the encounter the previous night, the man, the black sedan, and the address now sitting on Leo's desk. Leo was furious, but not at Connor. His anger seemed directed at the ghosts of his past, the enemies who had returned to threaten the fragile truth they were slowly piecing together. "Damn it," Leo muttered under his breath, rubbing a hand across his face. "I knew they'd come after us, but I didn't expect them to move this quickly." "Who are they?" Connor asked, his voice steady, though his nerves were frayed. "Who is this guy, and why is he so desperate to keep me from finding out the truth?" Leo stopped pacing and turned to face Connor, his jaw clenched. "His name is Victor Lane. He used to work for one of my competitors back when I was first building Armstrong Enterprises. His job was to dig up dirt on me, sabotage my business deals, and make my life hell." Connor's stomach twisted. "So he's been after you for years?" "Not just me," Leo said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "He's been involved with some powerful people who didn't want me to succeed. They tried to ruin me, and when that didn't work, they went after anyone connected to me." Connor felt a chill run down his spine. "Like my mother?" Leo nodded grimly. "Exactly. Your mother. She got caught in the middle of all this. I didn't know it at the time, but when we were together, those same people were watching us. They saw an opportunity to hurt me by hurting her. I never realized how far they were willing to go." Connor's mind raced, trying to process everything. His mother had been hunted by people trying to destroy Leo. That's why she had left, why she had hidden him away. She had been running from something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "So what do we do now?" Connor asked, his voice quiet, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Leo walked over to his desk and picked up the slip of paper with the address on it. He stared at it for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "We go," Leo finally said, his voice resolute. "We go to this address and find out what they're hiding." "But Connor," Leo looked up, his eyes hard, warning, "we have to be careful. These people don't play by the rules. If they know we're coming, they'll do everything they can to stop us." Connor nodded, his stomach churning with a mix of fear and anticipation. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting for them at that address, it held the answers to the questions that had haunted him his entire life. He wasn't just chasing the truth anymore. He was facing down the same enemies that had hunted his mother. As Connor left the office that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The enemies Leo had warned him about weren't just shadows anymore. They were real, and they were watching. And the next move was his. The drive to the address on the crumpled slip of paper was filled with a tense silence. Connor sat beside Leo in the back of an unmarked car, the low hum of the engine the only sound as they wound their way through the darker, less polished parts of the city. The air was heavy with anticipation, and every nerve in Connor's body was on high alert. This was it, the moment they would confront the shadows that had loomed over both of their lives for so long. Leo, usually so composed, sat with his hands gripping the edge of his seat, his jaw clenched tightly. Connor had seen him angry before, but this was different. There was a deeper edge to his tension now, as if Leo knew something was about to shift, something that couldn't be undone. The address had led them to a rundown warehouse district at the edge of the city, a far cry from the gleaming skyscrapers where Armstrong Enterprises was headquartered. The buildings here were old, weathered by time and neglect, their windows dark and broken, their walls tagged with graffiti. The air smelled of rust and oil, and the occasional flicker of a streetlight only emphasized the eerie stillness. "This is it," Leo muttered as the car rolled to a stop outside a large, rusted metal building. The warehouse loomed over them, its presence almost menacing in the dim light of the setting sun. Leo exchanged a glance with Connor, and for a moment, there was something in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "You sure you're ready for this?" Leo asked, his voice lower than usual. Connor nodded, though his throat was dry and his heart was pounding. "We've come this far. I have to know the truth." Without another word, they stepped out of the car. The ground crunched under their feet as they approached the building, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness of the evening. The door to the warehouse was heavy, its surface scratched and dented, but unlocked. Leo pushed it open with a firm hand, and they slipped inside. The interior was dark, only faint beams of light spilling through the cracks in the roof and the broken windows. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of something metallic lingered in the space. Rows of empty shelves lined the walls, their surfaces coated in grime. But at the far end of the room, Connor could make out a small area that looked lived in. A single desk stood in the center of the space, a small lamp casting a weak glow over it. Papers were strewn across the surface, along with old photographs and maps. Behind the desk stood a man, Victor Lane Starr. His presence felt heavy, like a predator who had been expecting them. Lane looked up as they entered, his face unreadable. He didn't seem surprised to see them. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Lane said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. He stepped around the desk, his gaze locked on Leo before flicking to Connor. "But you should have stayed out of this." "We're not backing off," Leo said, his voice like steel. "Not until we know everything. You've been pulling the strings long enough." Lane smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You really think you're the one in control here, Leo? That after all these years, you can just waltz in here and demand answers?" Connor stepped forward, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I deserve answers," he said, his voice hard. "This is about my mother. You destroyed her life, made her run. I want to know why." For the first time, Lane's expression shifted. Just a flicker of something beneath the surface, but it was there. He looked at Connor with a mix of amusement and something else, something darker. "Your mother was a complication," Lane said slowly, his tone carefully measured. "She knew too much. We couldn't let that happen." "What are you talking about?" Connor demanded, his fists clenched at his sides. "What did she know? What were you trying to hide?" Lane glanced at Leo, a cruel smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Leo, do you want to tell him? Or should I?" Leo's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Connor could feel the tension between them thickening, the air heavy with the weight of something unspoken. Lane took a slow step toward the desk, picking up one of the old photographs lying there. He held it out to Connor, who took it hesitantly. Connor's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the image. It was an old black and white photo of his mother, Emily, standing beside a man he didn't recognize. The two of them looked happy, smiling at the camera, but it was the man's face that sent a chill down Connor's spine. He wasn't just some stranger. He was someone important, someone powerful, and suddenly, Connor realized where he had seen that face before. That's the CEO of Foresight Technologies," Connor stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Foresight Technologies was a rival tech company that had collapsed under mysterious circumstances years ago. Lane's smile widened. "Now you're getting it." Connor's mind raced. His mother had been involved with Foresight Technologies? But how? And why would that put her in danger? Leo stepped forward, his voice low, filled with anger. "You used her. You manipulated her to get to me." Lane didn't deny it. He simply nodded, his expression calm, as if everything was playing out exactly as he had planned. "Your mother was smart, Leo. Too smart. She knew what was happening behind the scenes at Foresight. The deals, the corruption, the way they were funneling money into backdoor schemes to sabotage your company. She got too close. And once she realized what was happening, she did what any smart woman would do. She tried to warn you." Connor whispered, the realization hitting him hard. "She was trying to protect you." Leo's face was a mask of fury, but there was something else in his eyes now, regret. "But I didn't listen. I didn't believe her." "No," Lane said softly, "you didn't. And by the time you realized your mistake, it was too late. She was already gone, running for her life." Connor felt a sharp pain in his chest. His mother had been trying to protect Leo, trying to stop something far bigger than either of them. But in the process, she had been forced to leave everything behind, including him. "So you hunted her down," Connor said, his voice shaking with anger. "You made her life hell, all because she knew the truth about what Foresight was doing." Lane shrugged, as if it were nothing more than a business decision. "She was a threat. We couldn't let her spill what she knew. And then, when you were born, she had even more reason to hide. Connor's blood ran cold. Everything suddenly made sense. Why his mother had kept him a secret, why she had vanished. She had been protecting him from the very people who had destroyed her life. Leo's voice was dangerously low as he stepped toward Lane. You ruined her life, Victor. You destroyed everything. Lane didn't flinch. You destroyed her life, Leo. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have been caught in the crossfire. Connor's fists clenched, his body shaking with rage. But before he could say anything, Lane's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. But now, you're the one in the crossfire, Connor. The question is, are you smart enough to walk away? Connor met Lane's gaze, his heart pounding. He knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything his mother had sacrificed. We're not done, Connor said, his voice steady. I'm going to finish what she started. Lane's smile faded, and his eyes darkened. Then you've made your choice. And with that, the room plunged into silence, the weight of everything crashing down on Connor. The truth had been revealed, but it was only the beginning of the fight. The real battle was just about to begin. The warehouse air was thick with tension, and for a moment, everything felt frozen in time. Connor stood in the middle of the room, his heart pounding as Victor Lane's chilling words echoed in his ears. Lane's cryptic threat hung like a noose, but Connor was done running. He had spent his whole life wondering why his mother had kept so much hidden. But now, with the full truth out in the open, one thing was clear. She had been fighting against something dark and powerful to protect him. And now, it was Connor's turn to fight. Leo took a step forward, his presence commanding the room. There was a fire in his eyes, a sharp, dangerous determination that Connor hadn't seen before. You've made one mistake, Lane, Leo said, his voice low and deadly calm. You underestimated me, and you underestimated us. Victor Lane's expression darkened, but he didn't back down. And what exactly are you going to do, Leo? You think you can take me on? You've always been one step behind. Connor, however, was no longer content to stand in the shadows of this fight. He stepped forward, joining Leo, his resolve hardening. This isn't just about Leo anymore. You've been hiding behind lies and threats for years, but we're done playing your game. Connor's voice was steady, the anger controlled but burning just beneath the surface. My mother tried to stop you once, and I'm going to finish what she started. For a moment, Lane studied them both, his face blank but his eyes sharp, calculating. Then, without warning, he let out a cold, humorless laugh. You really think you can win this? He sneered. The truth won't save you, Connor. It's too late. But Connor wasn't listening to Lane anymore. He was focused on what he needed to do. His mother had been running, hiding, and sacrificing her life to protect him from men like Lane. But Connor wasn't the scared child she had left behind. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions any longer. He glanced at Leo, who gave him a firm nod of understanding. They were in this together now. Enough of this, Leo said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. He turned to Connor. We're not letting him get away with this. It's time to expose everything. Connor nodded, his mind racing. The evidence they needed was in the room. Lane had been sloppy, overconfident. The desk in front of them was littered with papers, old contracts, and documents from Foresight Technologies' secret dealings. The very proof that Lane had been trying to hide all along. They just needed to gather it and blow the whole thing wide open. Connor rushed to the desk, quickly sorting through the papers as Leo kept his eyes on Lane. He found financial statements, records of illegal transfers between Foresight Technologies and other shell companies, proof of their sabotage against Armstrong Enterprises. And there it was, a note from years ago, signed by Victor Lane himself, detailing the plan to manipulate Emily Williams, Connor's mother, and use her to get to Leo. Connor's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the document. His hands shook slightly, the weight of his mother's sacrifice hitting him all at once. She had been dragged into a war she never wanted to be part of, all because she had loved Leo and tried to do the right thing. She had paid the ultimate price to keep Connor safe, and now, he held in his hands the key to making sure her fight wasn't in vain. Connor turned to Leo, holding up the documents. This is it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is everything. We can take him down." Lane's expression finally shifted, his mask of confidence cracking as he saw the papers in Connor's hands. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat, taking a step forward. "You can't go public with that. It'll destroy everything. You'll bring down companies, people with real power. They won't let you live long enough to see it happen." Leo stepped in front of Connor, blocking Lane's path. "You've had your time, Lane. Now it's over." Lane's eyes darted between Leo and Connor, his composure unraveling. For the first time, he looked truly panicked, like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. "You're making a mistake. If you do this, you're putting a target on your backs. They'll come for you." But Leo wasn't fazed. He had faced down worse enemies in his rise to power, and now, with the truth on their side, he wasn't about to let fear stop him. "Let them come," Leo said coldly. "We're not running." Connor stood tall beside him, the documents clenched in his hands. "We're going to expose everything," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Everything you've done to destroy people's lives, everything you did to my mother. It's all going public." Lane's face twisted with fury, but there was nothing left for him to do. The power he had wielded for so long was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Connor and Leo turned away from Lane, walking toward the exit with the damning evidence in hand. Behind them, Lane's voice rang out, desperate and filled with rage. "You're finished. You think this ends here? You'll regret this." But Connor didn't look back. The warehouse door slammed shut behind them, cutting off Lane's final threats. The following days were a whirlwind. Connor and Leo worked tirelessly, compiling the evidence, reaching out to the media, and preparing for the inevitable fallout. When the story broke, it was explosive. News outlets ran the reports non-stop: how Foresight Technologies had engaged in illegal activities, how they had sabotaged Armstrong Enterprises, and how they had used Emily Williams as a pawn in their dirty games. It was a scandal that rocked the business world to its core. Connor watched the news from Leo's office, his heart pounding as the truth finally came to light. He felt a strange mix of relief and grief. His mother's name was finally cleared, her legacy no longer hidden in the shadows of powerful men like Victor Lane. But it didn't bring her back, and as much as Connor had wanted justice, he couldn't help but wish that she had been there to see it. Leo stood beside him, watching in silence. After a long pause, he turned to Connor, his expression softening. "She would have been proud of you, you know." Connor swallowed hard, emotions catching in his throat. "I hope so." Leo placed a hand on Connor's shoulder, the connection between them no longer strained by the mysteries of the past. "She did everything to protect you. And now, you've protected her legacy." Connor nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. He had spent so much of his life searching for answers, for some kind of closure. Now that he had it, he realized that this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, for him and for Leo. As they stood in the office, the weight of the past finally lifting, Connor knew that the future was uncertain. They had enemies, powerful ones, but they had faced them head-on and won. For the first time, Connor felt free from the secrets, free from the fear. And now, he had a new family, a new bond with Leo Armstrong. As the sun began to set outside the glass windows of Armstrong Enterprises, Connor and Leo stood side by side, united by the truth, ready to face whatever came next. Together, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter they would write together in the light, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. Months had passed since the scandal had erupted, and the dust had finally begun to settle. The once chaotic whirlwind of media attention had quieted, and life at Armstrong Enterprises returned to a new kind of normal. Connor, now more sure of himself than ever, sat at his desk, overlooking the city skyline. The view that had once seemed so intimidating now filled him with a quiet sense of determination. Though the journey had been painful, filled with secrets, betrayals, and danger, Connor had found what he had been searching for, the truth. His mother's legacy was no longer hidden, and her memory had been cleared of the shadows that had followed her for so long. The story of Emily Williams had become one of courage, not of tragedy, and Connor found peace knowing she had fought for something greater, something that mattered. Leo, too, had changed. The weight of the past had lifted from his shoulders, and while they still faced enemies from the world they had exposed, they faced them together. Leo had accepted Connor not just as an intern, but as family, a bond neither of them had expected, but one that had grown stronger with each passing day. They were no longer defined by the wounds of the past, but by the future they were building together. One afternoon, as Connor sat in the office, Leo knocked gently on the door before stepping inside. "How are you holding up?" Leo asked, his voice softer than usual. Connor smiled, glancing at the stack of papers on his desk. "Better than I thought I would. It's strange, you know? I spent so long looking for answers, and now that I have them, I feel ready for whatever comes next." Leo nodded, his gaze thoughtful as he sat across from Connor. "You've come a long way, Connor. More than I think even you realize." Connor leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "I just want to make sure everything we went through wasn't for nothing, that we keep fighting for what's right." Leo smiled, a rare expression of warmth crossing his face. "Your mother would be proud of you. You're doing more than just surviving. You're building something better." Connor looked out at the city, the sun setting on the horizon, casting a golden light across the buildings. He knew that there would always be challenges ahead, that the world they lived in wasn't free from darkness or danger. But for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came, not alone, but with the strength of the truth behind him. In the silence of the moment, a sense of hope filled the room. Connor knew that the future wasn't guaranteed, that battles would continue to come, but there was something stronger inside him now. A belief that no matter how powerful the forces against them, they could stand tall. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what came next. About building a future where truth and justice prevailed, where the sacrifices of those who had come before him weren't in vain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the room in a final wash of light, Connor turned to Leo with a quiet smile. "We're going to be okay," he said softly, a promise to himself, to Leo, and to the memory of his mother. Leo met his gaze, the same sense of certainty reflected in his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We are." The sun set on another day, but for Connor, it felt like a new dawn, a new beginning, filled with hope, with purpose. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that together, they would face them with courage and strength, because the future was theirs to shape now. And in that, there was hope. Hope that the light they had fought for would continue to shine, even in the darkest of times.